Welcome to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast, where we help you in the LGBTQ plus community find a safe and affordable retirement place. Join Mark Goldstein as he interviews others who live in gay-friendly places around the globe. Learn about the climate, cost of living, healthcare, crime and safety, and more. Now, here's your host, Mark Goldstein.
Welcome to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast, and I'm Mark Goldstein. And today we have special guest, Devon Brooks. And our topic today will be Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. So I'll tell you a little bit about Devon. Devon was a military brat, but grew up mostly in and around Virginia in the United States. 31 years ago, he moved to Berkeley, California for graduate school, which is where he met his husband, John. In 1999, Devon and John moved to Los Angeles, where they still reside. Devon is a professor of social work and former associate dean for faculty at the University of Southern California. He does research on child maltreatment prevention and treatment, adoption, and foster care. He tends to teach classes on research, human behavior, intercultural competence, and social innovation. He also teaches global immersion courses in Europe and one day hopes to teach similar courses in Mexico. Devon and his husband plan to retire in Mexico, at least part-time. And they have a home in Puerto Vallarta for over 5 years and visit Vallarta as often as they can. Apart from his work as a professor and associate dean, Devon is passionate about gardening, home renovation, design, architecture, genealogy, and traveling. He understands Spanish better than he can speak it, but he's working on that. So Devon, welcome. I feel like we know each other for years, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Well, thank you, Mark. Pleasure's all mine, and happy to be here and with your guests.
Yeah, and do you want to add anything to what I just told the audience about yourself, or before we get started?
I guess I would just underscore the military brat part, because in preparing and thinking about this podcast and this conversation, it occurred to me that my experience as being a kid, my formative years of growing up on a military base and traveling to other countries, that really shaped me and my worldview, and it's actually related to the story of Vallarta and how my husband and I came to know and be in Vallarta.
Great. So why did you choose Puerto Vallarta for retirement? Well, you're not retired yet, but why did you choose as at least being a part-time destination for yourself and your husband?
Yeah, so I guess just to continue with the point about being a military brat, because I do think it in some ways started there as a 5, 6, 7-year-old living on a military base with people from around the world, and then moving as my family did to Germany when I was still a young kid, first, second grade. So spent the first few years of elementary school in Germany and Europe, came back to the States, continued to live on military bases where there were mostly at the time American soldiers who very often had wives from around the world. So at a very early age, I was exposed, I think, to different cultures. It was something that was just part of my world, something I was very comfortable with, and grew up with friends from all over the world. And that was something that stayed with me. As you indicated, I grew up mostly in Virginia, resided in Northern California, Northern Virginia, right outside of Washington, D.C., very metropolitan, international area. And that was just something that I always, without really kind of thinking about it too much as I was growing up, it was something that imprinted on me, and just to have friends from around the world, to be exposed to different cultures and peoples and traditions, that stayed with me and has become part of who I am, and I think what I look for in terms of opportunities, certainly in terms of friends and partners, but also in terms of opportunities, educational opportunities, employment opportunities, living opportunities, that kind of thing. So I think that set the stage for the type of place where I would eventually reside during my professional years, but also in terms of my retirement. So kind of fast forwarding, why specifically Vallarta for retirement? It actually, the decision to and live and to begin setting roots in retirement began a few years ago, when probably about 15 years ago, when my husband and I started thinking about where we would want to retire. So there were certain kinds of areas that we thought were on the short list for us. So diverse areas that were very inclusive, LGBTQ friendly, that kind of thing. But my husband's family is from California, a few hours north of us. They're getting older, as are we all. And so it was important for us to be close to them. And so we considered retiring in places in the States. We still think about other options for us. We thought about Palm Springs, and we actually started setting roots in Palm Springs 15 years ago. That was our first purchase of a home, thinking it would be our retirement home. And so eventually we decided that Palm Springs didn't make sense for us, and we started looking within the country and outside for where else would. Vallarta ended up being on the short list. We had never visited, and we had lots of friends and family who had, and they always came back and said, "Oh, Devon, we think you and John would love it here. You've got to visit." And of course, we had been reading about learning about Puerto Vallarta, how wonderful it was supposed to be, how welcoming it was supposed to be. And for us, a lot of the appeal had to do with the fact that if we needed to, we could get back home to John's family, to our family, fairly quickly. We're in Los Angeles. It's a 2.5, 3-hour flight to LA. So we could get back from Vallarta. There are lots of flights out, so we could get back to LA and then to his family if necessary. So that wasn't the deciding factor, but it was instrumental.
Oh yeah, that's important. It's really important.
Absolutely.
And I think your background gives you an advantage also of just your previous background in knowing people all over the world. I think that's, you have one up on me and you have one up on a lot of people. It's a great experience to have. So tell us geographically, where is Vallarta located within Mexico, and where in Vallarta are you located? Do you have your residence?
Yeah. So Puerto Vallarta is in the state of Jalisco in Mexico. It's along the western coast of the Pacific coast of Mexico in what is called the Banderas Bay. It is, if you look at a map geographically, Vallarta is kind of in the middle of the country, again, along the western coast. So it is, our home is about 1.5 blocks from the beach, and the beach, the water that we see is actually the bay. In Vallarta, there are colonias, neighborhoods, and so this is common in Mexico, and our home is in the colonia that is known as Emiliano Zapata. So the colonias are kind of, they're bigger than neighborhoods. They're more formal neighborhoods. They're not counties. They're somewhere in between. So our home is in Emiliano Zapata, okay? And within that colonia are a bunch of different neighborhoods, sometimes a little bit more formal because they have neighborhood associations. Other times they're just they're somewhat informal, such as the romantic zone or zona romantica. So
I hear a lot about that.
You do, and interestingly, I don't know the history of it, but in talking with friends and real estate agents and tour guides in the romantic zone or zona romantica, it is said, was created by real estate agents who were wanting to appeal to tourists, to gringos, term affectionately often used to refer to very often either permanent people who move permanently or who are visitors to Mexico or to Vallarta. So the romantic zone is, if you look at a map, it's not on a map. Maybe it is on more recent maps, but the romantic zone or the zona romantic kind of overlaps with a couple of neighborhoods all within Emiliano Zapata. So
that's so interesting.
It is, because it was a marketing ploy, essentially. And it is quite romantic. So when you go to Vallarta and the few blocks that people associate with the Zona Romantica, it's absolutely romantic and charming. There are bougainvillea trees and plants along either side of cobblestone street. So it is quite a romantic area. So that's where we reside. There, if you talk to different people and ask them about the boundaries for the romantic zone, I don't think anybody would agree. We generally know where it is. And Emiliano, and within it, again, the Zona Romantica, are on the southern side of the town of Puerto Vallarta. So, and we're also if you look at the landscape of the town of Vallarta, the area closest to the beach for 4 or 5 blocks east is pretty flat, and then very quickly you hit the hills. Okay? So Zona Romantica is on the southern western side of the town of Vallarta.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's even I have other friends who live in Puerto Vallarta, and they live in the romantic zone as well, and they say it's just beautiful.
It really is.
Yeah. So is living in an LGBTQ plus community important to you? And if so, do you live in one, or is it just Vallarta in general is totally LGBTQ friendly?
Yeah, I think the latter. I think Vallarta overall is an incredibly friendly place, very welcoming. So it starts with that, and then I think that it's also an especially welcoming place in terms of sexual orientation. The entire town is LGBT friendly. There are gayer, I guess, neighborhoods and beaches and beach clubs. Yeah, they're kind of on the south side in Emiliano Zapata. So there happen to be some neighborhoods, some clusters of the romantic zone that are more dense in terms of bars, in terms of the beach clubs that cater primarily to gay men. That's changing. We're seeing more establishments that kind of that have been opened by lesbians or that target the lesbian community. Of course, not exclusively, but those the visibly gay bars and establishments tend to be on the very far south side of town, which is where the romantic zone is in Emiliano Zapata. There's a river that cuts the town of Vallarta, the Quali River. It separates kind of the Emiliano Zapata neighborhood, the south side and the north side. So generally speaking, anything on the south side of town is kind of the gay neighborhood, the gay area, the romantic zone. And then you cross over the bridge to the other side of town, which is actually the kind of downtown centro area that tends to be less gay. But even over there on that side of town, which is only, we're talking about 20 minutes from one side of the north side of town to the south side of town. So the entire town of Vallarta, downtown area, is walkable. The north side of town has gay bar. It's very gay friendly. The entire town, I think, is gay friendly. And just in the past few years, the neighborhoods on the outside of town, still part of the larger city of Puerto Vallarta, but more in the suburban areas, again, 15 minutes away from the south side of town. So some of those neighborhoods outside of town used to be known as the towns where people lived, or the neighborhoods where people lived if they didn't want to be downtown in the urban parts of town, if they had families, if they had kids, if they wanted more space, bigger houses and lawns. Those areas now are also incredibly popular with the LGBT community just in the past few years. So the entire town, I would say, is very LGBTQ friendly. Yeah.
So would you compare it to like a Wilton Manors type place, or is it more than that? Do you think, and I'm not comparing, just as I know Wilton Manors is totally, it's like almost 100% gay. I don't think is as gay or LGBT as Wilton Manors is. Is that a good assumption, or?
I've never been to Wilton Manors, but what I understand about it is that it is not. I've actually not experienced a lot of places like Vallarta. As I indicated, I grew up outside of D.C. As a teenager, started going to gay bars in DuPont Circle, visited New York, lived in Berkeley. Of course, San Francisco is right across the bay. We've also lived in or owned homes in Palm Springs. Vallarta's special. So although the entire town, I think, is very gay friendly, and is, I suggested, even in the south side, where I would say that it's most dense in terms of mostly gay men, which is changing. It is not, I certainly wouldn't call it a gay city, which is one of the things that my husband and I love about it. It feels like a city that is just open and inclusive, where we can just be ourselves and invited and welcomed, and we feel safe. So the entire place feels inclusive. So I would say there are those gay pockets, those gay neighborhoods, where if you're walking through, you'll see what appear to be gay bars targeting gay men mostly. But even those, if you go in, all kinds of, you'll see women there as well. So even in the neighborhood where we are, which is kind of considered a gay neighborhood, I don't know that I've ever gone to a gay bar. I mean, there are lots of them.
They're all bars, right? That was going to be my next question.
Yeah,
they're gay bars, or they're just bars that everybody goes to?
That's right. So, Mark, I think there are quite a few. There are lots of gay bars there, clubs. I'm sure in the 7 years we've been going there that my husband and I visited some, but we mostly go to bars and restaurants that in any time you go in, you might see more gay men in some of them, but they're not. That's right.
It's all inclusive.
That's right.
So, for example, I live in Phoenix, and I live in an apartment building, a condo. My down the hall neighbor and her husband went to Vallarta and had a great time. They said, and they hung out with gay men all the time.
That's right.
And they're straight. And they had a wonderful time. It's just like everybody just was themselves. And yeah, it's to me, that's like utopia.
It's really wonderful.
We're all kind of looking for.
It is. And it's funny that you shared the story that you just did, because I had 15, 20 of the closest friends that I've had for a couple of decades, and they're grown kids. We all had recently a reunion in Vallarta a few years ago. And the only time I can remember going into a club that I think might be considered more of a gay club was with them. When we were walking around and they just wanted to go into a place to get a drink. But
out.
it is, it's nice. There are lots of options. So there are options for gay men who want a club, a space that is predominantly targeting gay men. But most of the places, as you said, are just, I think, inclusive and welcoming of anyone.
That's great.
Yeah, it is.
That's what I'm looking for. So
yeah.
I think a lot of people are as well. So being from the U.S., how easy is it to make friends? If you were to move permanently to Vallarta, how easy or difficult is it to make friends there? And that brings us up to the language question as well. Do you need to learn Spanish to live there full time? I know it definitely helps, and me as a person just would like to, if I'm an immigrant or an expat, so to speak, from going to another country, I kind of want to feel like I'd like to immerse myself in their culture and their language. So how important is that? And do you need to learn Spanish? And again, how easy or difficult is it to make friends?
So we chose Vallarta in part because it's LGBT friendly and for the other reasons I discussed. But the fact that it's LGBT friendly for us also means other things, right? So as we were just discussing, if it's LGBT friendly for us, it means that or at least it increases the likelihood that it is inclusive, that it is open, that it is welcoming. And I know certainly that doesn't describe all areas that have large gay communities. In this case, Vallarta's LGBTQ plus community, I do think, as we were just discussing, that it is inclusive in a broader way. And I think what that means for us, or what we've experienced, is that it's also a very friendly, welcoming place in general that begins with the people who are from Vallarta and the people, I think, who move to Vallarta, whether it's full-time or part-time. So what we've experienced is that there are a lot of people like us who find Vallarta to be appealing for the same reasons we find it to be appealing. People are authentic and real and friendly. Not a lot of pretense, not a lot of attitude. There's diversity, not as much as perhaps some areas, but so those are, I think, all associated with the LGBT aspect of it, of the town. And so what that means is it makes it pretty easy to meet people. So even before we bought a home, a condo in the romantic zone that was being built. We bought it pre-construction. And before we even took possession of our condominium, we had created a Facebook group and become close friends with people in our building, some of whom were Mexican nationals, but many were from the U.S., many are from Canada. So even before meeting them in person, we had established relationships. And I'm happy to say that we're good friends with
What a
owners.
great idea.
It's wonderful. And so I think that's a very good example of how easy it is to meet people and to become friends. If you want, on a more superficial level, you meet people and you just have fun with them. But it's also pretty easy. I think my husband and I probably have more friends in Vallarta than we do in Los Angeles. So it's very friendly, very welcoming, easy to meet people, easy to find common interests, easy to communicate with. So one does not need to, in my experience, one does not need to speak Spanish, though it certainly helps. My husband is pretty fluent. I can understand better than I can speak. I can read. So I do think it makes for a better experience if one is Spanish speaking, but especially downtown and even more so in Zona Romantica. One can, if they chose, not know very much Spanish at all and still do okay. The locals are very understanding and accommodating. And what's neat, recently I've noticed going into restaurants, the wait staff will ask, do you prefer English or Spanish? And a lot of them are happy to teach as they're waiting. So if we're ordering things, they're incredibly patient. It's really kind of neat, Mark, because my husband and I have noticed it. It seems to be kind of taking off. Certainly not intentional, but they'll ask, do you want it to be in Mexican? And then they work with you. They'll correct you I'm a professor. I've learned from them. And so some of the things that they're doing, I'm thinking, that's a neat kind of way of correcting someone, helping to educate someone around the language and the culture. So they're not only helping with the language, but they're explaining things about the culture as they're doing that. So you don't have to.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to let you and the listeners know that you don't have to speak Spanish. There are lots of opportunities in one's everyday life to learn Spanish, but there are lots of language classes in person and online. They're everywhere in Vallarta. There are Spanish schools, so it's doable.
We were talking about restaurants also. Mm-hmm. It brings me to the question of, is it like living in the United States where you're sitting at a restaurant having a meal and the wait staff is like waiting for the next table to turn over? Or is it more laid back, and do they just have that laid back atmosphere where they don't really care how long you take at a restaurant? Have you noticed the difference at all, or is there a difference?
I would say it's mostly the laid back atmosphere. You go into a place and you might be there for hours. We've certainly been there in restaurants where we start early for cocktails, and then we'll have a meal, and then one set of friends will leave and another set comes in, and they'll have drinks, and we've been there 4 or 5 hours. So it's I think in general, Vallarta is very relaxed. There's not a lot of pressure. Now, there are the beach clubs where you rent out chairs and you're on the beach, and so some of those spaces, they want you ordering something if you're there, but I would say for the most part the restaurants, bars are extremely casual, laid back. We don't feel pressure. They're that's not to say they're not attentive. So they will, and I might be wrong about this, but my sense is that in some restaurants, I think the staff think that the Canadian and U.S. gringos expect to be waited on more. Mm-hmm. And so I get the sense that their inclination would be to just leave guests alone, but that they think they should stop by a little bit more often than they ordinarily would. So they're very attentive, but there's no pressure. And there have been times when we've said, "Oh no, we're good. We'll call you over if we want something." And they're very easy to talk to and work with. So sometimes your wait staff will pull up a chair and sit down with you and have a cocktail or do shots with you.
There you go.
But they're responding to, they're very responsive, attentive, and fun. So they don't think anything. If you say pull up a chair, they won't get in trouble, they'll do it because they want to sit down and have fun with you and chat with you. So
that sounds great.
yeah,
It really does. A little bit different than some places here.
and it throws people off sometimes because they're suspicious of it. And,
Like, what do you want?
Exactly.
You want a bigger tip?
It's,
And do they tip?
they do.
Tip?
They do
In Mexico?
tip. Yep. So
Because some places, some countries, they don't expect tips.
Tipping is, I would say prior to COVID, there was less of a culture or less of an expectation where propinas, tips, are common but not expected. So if somebody left without tipping, the server would be disappointed, but it wouldn't be the statement that it is in the U.S. if somebody left without a tip.
I'm so used to it. Automatically, it's like 20%
And
at least.
It really is the case that most, prior to COVID, I would say 15 to 20% would be common. Beginning with COVID, I think people started tipping more because they recognized the need.
Yeah.
And so 20 to 25%. Now I will say it's important to keep in mind that Vallarta is pretty affordable, right? And I know that's relative, but when you can go out and alcohol is expensive. If you go to a restaurant and don't have alcohol, you can get out the door paying $5-10 for a really good meal. So
That's incredible.
yeah.
I can't even fathom that because you know what it's like here, and especially in Los Angeles and here in Phoenix too. We don't leave a restaurant for two at least for maybe $100.
It's crazy, Mark. We were just down 2 weeks ago, and it was restaurant week, which is really restaurant weeks, a couple of weeks.
Right.
So their restaurant week prices, I think, were $20 to $49, so $50 for 3 to 5 courses at the best restaurants
Wow.
in Vallarta. The most expensive,
Wow.
$50. I don't think any of them were. Yeah. So, and they started in the 20s. So that was, as I said, 3 to 5 courses, not including alcohol, but 3 to 5 courses at the best restaurants during restaurant week. So
I definitely have to visit because I'm getting hungry right now.
yes, and amazing food. It's become quite a foodie town. So,
Yeah, I'm sure. And it's a big tourist town too, so I'm sure there are excellent restaurants.
Amazing restaurants, amazing. They're into the new craft cocktails. I've seen some amazing cocktails that smoke and are on fire.
Yeah.
Some pretty fancy, exquisite tales. Most of which I would say $7. A $10 cocktail is expensive. The fancy ones there, but yeah, lots of new restaurants, and I do want to underscore the importance of the kind of the range, or just the range of restaurants. So they're the more expensive, fancier restaurants, but the taco stands throughout town, the restaurants where you can go in for a couple of dollars, $5-10 and have a meal, they're everywhere, and you get really good food, which is kind of neat because there's no, unlike LA and certain places, we're walking into a restaurant where the food is inexpensive. People wouldn't even, they'd look at the menu and just keep walking. That's not the case in Vallarta. So you come to know, oh yeah, you go to this taco stand or this restaurant where you can get out the door having paid $10 for just an incredible meal. So that is the case throughout Vallarta, I think.
And is it all Mexican food or is it international? Can you get pretty much anything, seafood, or is it
lots of
typical?
seafood? So it's mostly Mexican fusion. I would say a lot of we're getting in the past couple of years more Indian, Asian restaurants. There's a popular German restaurant down the street from us. Lots of Italian restaurants.
Can you get a burger or a pizza?
Lots of burger places, yes. Burgers and pizzas. I'm vegetarian. I can get vegetarian Impossible burgers, some of the best ones. I have no problem being a vegetarian in any of the restaurants in Vallarta, including some of the taco stands. Well, they'll make something up on the spot that's completely vegetarian. We are seeing, again, just in the last couple of years where Vallarta has taken off, just really taken off, all kinds of new restaurants, all kinds of new cuisines popping up. Bagel shops, for example. There are a couple of new ones that
Bagel
just
shops
opened
in
up.
my New York City.
That's exactly.
That's what I miss.
That's
Excellent.
yeah.
Okay, so can you explain what the local economy is like? Like, can you provide examples to our audience about housing costs, renting and owning, and utilities, electric bills, water bills, gas, taxes? Can you review that?
Sure. I'll share a little bit about what I know best based on our experience and then what I understand. So as I indicated, my husband and I bought 5 years ago, we bought a pre-construction condo. At the time that we bought, we started looking 2 years prior. So 7 years ago, when we started looking, our budget for a 2-bedroom, 2-bath home in the romantic zone, Emiliano Zapata, I think we started around $200,000. That was our budget. Okay? 7 years ago, we almost put in an offer, a resale, that was asking $180. At the time, our agent said, oh, no, that's too expensive. And he encouraged us, if we were going to put in an offer, he was pretty confident we could get it for $140,000. 2 years later, 5 years ago, it was very difficult to get a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in that price range. We were looking at the mid 2 to mid 3 range, which is where we landed for brand new pre-construction 30-unit building with amenities, pool, security, gym. We got to help design it, that kind of thing. So very affordable. What's that?
I've seen pictures.
Oh, yeah. So that's in a great location, great building. We couldn't be happier, especially when, at the time, when we started looking 7 years ago, we were still looking at other places. We knew we wanted LGBT inclusive area. We wanted to be in a warm climate area near the beach, ideally. So then 150, even going up to $300,000 for a space like that was very appealing to us compared to what we were seeing in other parts of the U.S. and even other parts of Mexico. So 5 years since, we've got friends who recently closed on a place, and we were working with them and helping them to look at places. So they just took possession of a condo that's comparable, that's just 2 blocks away. They paid significantly more, not quite double, but that's how in 5 years the prices have jumped significantly. So I can let you know that right now, if one is looking for, say, a new condo in the romantic zone, $350 is not very likely. 500,000 still possible, but it is now not unusual to see homes, new construction condos going above the 500,000 range on the south side of town. If you cross the river, exactly, they gentrify.
The prices.
They do. And it's interesting. It's a complicated issue, right? Gentrification, because the had lots of conversations with our friends who are local. They love it. They want the construction. They want people coming in and buying. They want. It's a quick aside. Our building, on the ground floor of our building, there is an Italian restaurant and a Starbucks, and a lot of the tourists, gringos, kind of are looking at that and thinking, come to Vallarta and there's an Italian restaurant and a Starbucks. Locals love it. They would, if you walk into our Starbucks, there are a lot of locals. They wanted the Starbucks. They love, the Italian restaurant is a very popular restaurant with the gringos and with the locals. So the gays have come in. And now straight tourists as well. And COVID, of course, kind of accelerated this, but I've seen this happen in West Hollywood, where West Hollywood, and we've actually, as a professor of social work, I do immersions, not just around the world, but we do local immersions for our students, incoming students, and I do one on West Hollywood, or used to do one on West Hollywood, where we would meet with different agencies and West Hollywood officials, and they would routinely share with us a little bit about the history of West Hollywood, and they shared that over time, because West Hollywood came to be known as a safe place for gay men, and the sheriff's department, it was pretty safe to walk around as a gay man, that over time, single women started moving to West Hollywood, so they could walk everywhere, the restaurants, the dry cleaners, they were safe. And then straight men, single men, started moving in because of all the single women. And so now there's, and West Hollywood officials will share this with you, there's kind of a battle now with some of the gay men feeling displaced, because a lot of straight singles and now families with young kids, because they can walk to the restaurants and to the markets, have moved in. So we're seeing some of that in Vallarta, I think. It was the romantic zone, predominantly gay men, but now there are a lot of single straight people moving in, women coming in, straight couples moving in. In terms of gringos, it was mostly, in my experience, we noticed mostly white gringos, and within that population, white gay men. I'm seeing more and more black people coming in, more, not as many Asian or East Indian, Middle Eastern people, but we're seeing diversity in terms of sexual orientation and ethnicity within Vallarta. But what's happened is that that's kind of pushed out the areas that are considered desirable, in quotes. Right? So now the north side of town, the suburbs that I was talking about, so those areas, you can still, you can get a home, single family home, condo, couple 100,000 square feet, couple 2-3 bedrooms and baths for $300,000 US.
Wow.
Just on the other side of town, and certainly
maybe those will get gentrified. Has the gentrification also affected locals, like priced out the locals?
Yes and no. So many locals don't live right in the urban areas. A lot do, but there are many who live outside of town and come into town. So those areas have not been affected, apart from some of the suburbs that I mentioned earlier. But many people live outside of town, and there's still pockets even in the romantic zone, there's still, if you've been living there, you haven't necessarily been pushed out, though developers are certainly coming in and buying up whole blocks. But there's still a lot of poverty in Vallarta. So you'll see next to a new construction, you'll see a existing structure without a roof or walls or a toilet on the roof. It is. But those folks I think they welcome the opportunity to work, and so I don't think many. I'm certain some have been displaced, but in the areas we're talking about, I think they've been tourist areas for a long time. So they're still.
Your utility bills? What would you say compared to the U.S. that you're paying?
And Mark, before I move on to that, because I was talking about purchasing, I do want to mention that in terms of renting, one can rent easily, I think, for $500 to $1,000. In fact, I came across, I'm on different Facebook groups for Vallarta, so I notice all the time the real estate, the listings. I saw a great listing just this morning, few blocks from us, 3 blocks from us. It's $1,100. And that is expensive for the unit. It was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath in the romantic zone on what is considered by many to be kind of one of the best streets. That's $1,100. That's a lot for rent. So you can get, I think, for around $1,000, certainly $1,000, $1,500, a house, a larger condo space, and a house if you're renting outside of town. So it's still, I think, very affordable. Yeah. In terms of utilities, we're unusual because we have a condo that we rent out as a vacation rental. So our utility bills are ridiculous because like some places in the States, when you hit a certain threshold, you get moved into a new tier that is more expensive. We've been in that tier since year 1 because guests, when they come in,
they don't care.
It gets hot.
Turn off lights.
They don't turn out the lights or the air. Vallarta gets very hot. And the noon starts getting hot. July, August, September, 90 degrees, I would say, Fahrenheit, 32 Celsius. Like so Florida. With humidity, right? And so when we actually don't, we intentionally try not to rent. We bump up our prices during those months to cover the utilities, and if we don't rent, we're quite fine with that. So this is all to say that our monthly utilities is $200, I would say, on average, to maybe $300.
That's including your water, your electric, gas.
So our HOAs covers our water and our gas, and so it's covering our electricity. And it was about $100 a month before we got bumped in. So you get bumped into that tier and you're there for, I think, a year or 2 years before you can even be considered, before they will move you back down based on your kind of moving a monthly average. So it was about, I think, $100 a month, US dollars, when we moved in before we started renting a lot. And that was with us still using the electricity, the AC. There are people who do not use AC at all. Many homes don't have AC. They have a fan, and the traditional Mexican architecture, very smart, the way that they designed some of the buildings with windows on either side of the building so that you'd get, with a fan, you'd get an airflow. There would be sometimes a terrace with the unit actually set back so that it was shaded, so that you're and cinder blocks or bricks, right? So that you're in what feels kind of like a cave. It's darker, but it's cool. So utilities for us more expensive because we're renting out to guests who like to use electricity, cable. We've got local phone. We've got cable with Mexican language stations, American language or U.S. language stations, and Canadian stations in English and French. Probably $100 a month for all of that. Highest speed internet, $50, but starting at $25, I think, for
so cheap.
Yeah, so it's all very
what I'm paying here in Phoenix. I mean, the summer months in Phoenix, and to be fair, in the winter months we shut off our AC too, and it's dry here, so we get us maybe $80, $90 bill with hardly any air conditioning. But in the summer we have gone up to 300, and we're in a condo as well.
Oh, wow.
We're in
Yeah.
1,700 square foot condo.
Yeah.
And we've paid that much in the summer. We just replaced our HVAC unit. So hopefully last year we did, and towards the end of the summer, we did see a noticeable difference in the energy efficiency. So our
Right.
bills went down. So hopefully this year we'll see the same thing. But as a comparison, Vallarta is pretty inexpensive as far as utilities is concerned as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the summers tell us more about the climate. So in the summers, do you want to be inside all the time or at the beach? Tell us about a little bit about that. Is it like Florida humid?
I would say summer starting in July, it begins to be like Florida, East Coast, or on the West Coast, Palm Springs.
Yeah.
Hot and humidity year round. The average is in the 80s. Very, very pleasant most of the year. I've worn long pants twice in 7 years in Vallarta. Once my first trip down, because I didn't know what to expect. And then I think the first time we were in Vallarta and went to a restaurant for Christmas where I thought I had to dress up with some khakis or something like that. I was the only one John and I were the only ones in long pants. So I don't have it, we keep clothes down there. I have no long pants. I don't have a jacket there. We wear nothing but shorts and short sleeves, even in the colder months in December. So year round average, I would say 80, 27, 30 Celsius. July starts getting hot, and that's where the rains can start, though I think July, August, September are kind of the hot months, and they're also the rainy months where you will get these torrential storms, which we love. They're beautiful. The skies are amazing, the thunderstorms and the lightning.
Except for the hurricane last year.
So occasionally we'll get the hurricanes coming through, and yes, I mean that.
Is that often? Does that happen often?
No, I remember reading something that suggested that was unusual. It was a once in a lifetime, not once in a lifetime, but once in 20-year hurricane. And the waters, it was tragic, and sadly a few people, including some young people, lost their lives. So as I mentioned earlier, Vallarta's at the bottom of mountains and hills. So
I remember
when it
the
rains
bridge
a
went
lot,
out too.
the bridge, which just opened, but yes, reopened. The bridge went out. There was lots of flooding. So you do get these heavy rains regularly, but it doesn't faze people. So you will see the sidewalks in parts of Vallarta are 18 inches in some areas, 18, 24 inches, because the flooding, when it rains heavily, you'll have that much rain, and then it just washes off into the bay. It doesn't slow people down, so you'll see them, you'll know they're a tourist if they have a raincoat or an umbrella. Right? Everybody else just knows you get wet, and you either...
Right. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. So you'll see a mom with a couple of kids kind of walking down the street doing their regular chores or whatever it is. It doesn't slow most people down. It cools things off. And so it's not unusual for it to be hot during the day. So coming back to your question, people during the summer, people will spend time at the beach or beach clubs or around a pool, but they do want to refresh. So they'll make sure they're not going out hiking a lot as much during the summer, but they figured out, like in Palm Springs, how to work with the times of the day. So you'll get out early in the morning, kind of walk around, do your thing, and then maybe spend time indoors or at the beach or pool in the early afternoon when it's the hottest. And then 5, 6, 7 o'clock, the rains will come in, and sometimes it's a heavy downpour, and it's over in a half an hour, just in time to head out for dinner, to do something in the evening. So September starts to cool off, so you're moving out of the rainy season and the off season. September is pretty...
You find some relief then. You can say, I can breathe.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
How about, do they have an arts and culture scene at all?
They do. So they have arts. There are quite a few museums, and there are museum walks during parts. So there's time during the year, can't remember which months, but over a couple of months, where every Wednesday there's a museum walk. In fact, there are two, one on the north side of town where a bunch of museums and galleries are, and then on the south side there not a lot of museums, so more galleries, more smaller scale kind of arts and crafts centers. I mentioned the River Kuali. There's a little kind of island on that river, so you walk from the south side, north side, or across from one side to the other, and you'll walk over. And you mentioned the bridge, Mark, that wiped out. That's the bridge that connects the two parts of town that I mentioned. So near that bridge is a very small island. There's a community center, so you'll see lots of kind of local arts and crafts in places that, some of the places I guess would be like museums or craft centers, but a lot of the arts and crafts are also sold. So you'll see them being sold throughout the town. There's in the condo where we live, if you will look out of our terrace, there is a new children's museum, an interactive children's museum. So again, like the restaurants and bars that I mentioned, seeing more and more of over the past few years, there are more and more museums and shows, lots of live entertainment. So you're seeing more and more of those shows that are catering to gringos, but certainly if you include options that are in Spanish, there's I think a pretty vibrant arts and crafts scene. What's new is the growing arts and crafts scene that is in English language, or in both English and Mexican.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, I see different cities in Mexico also. They have these outdoorsy singers and concerts and stuff like that as well. So, yeah, and it seems very enjoyable also.
Absolutely. And you'll see those kind of interspersed even in the touristy areas. So you'll see traditional dancing, or someone making certain kinds of crafts that are associated with indigenous communities, tequila tasting, or they'll show you how to make tequila. So there are lots of things for all kinds of people. Yeah. So the restaurant, so making foods, traditional foods, or the different racia or mezcal, making or tasting kinds of events, things for kids, things for older adults. Everywhere in between. I think Vallarta has something to offer.
That's great. How about transportation? Do you need a car? I think my friends that moved from Phoenix to Vallarta, they don't have a car. but they like call an Uber if they have to go. I know there's a Costco out by the airport, so they would call an Uber if they had to do that. But do you need a car in the romantic zone or in the central area?
No, one does not need a car. We don't have a car. We walk in Vallarta. We pretty much walk everywhere if we're on a tight schedule and need to get to a restaurant or something on the other side of town. We might call it an Uber. So Vallarta, about 4 years ago, Uber moved into Vallarta. Prior to that, public transportation through the bus system is widely available. So lots of people use the public buses, about 45 cents for a trip. But many people like us will just walk everywhere or use Uber. Since Uber has been in, they're everywhere along with the taxis. There's also InDriver, which some people aren't familiar with, but it's similar to Uber and Lyft, but rather than the driver telling you what to pay, you tell them what you're willing to pay. And then they will, so then as soon as you say, I'll pay this amount to get here, you get a bunch of drivers saying, okay, I accept, or they might counter you. So I think you certainly don't need a car. Whenever we go to Costco or Home Depot or to a nursery outside of town, we will take an Uber or InDriver. You can also, a lot of people take taxis, but you can also tell an Uber or InDriver, you can ask them to wait for you, or you can basically hire them, right? So you'll start off at Costco or Kmart or Walmart that they have, and then go to the next place and they'll wait for you. So you can leave everything, your bags or whatever it is in the car, and do a couple of hours of running around town, $25 maybe. And then you can also hire private drivers if you want to do day trips, or if you want to go to Guadalajara, or
do they have trains like you said, Guadalajara? If I wanted to go from Vallarta, Guadalajara, or Vallarta to Mexico City, is there like a Amtrak type train?
Not yet. So no, right now. So a few years ago, they started building a highway system that would allow one to come from Mexico City or Guadalajara. It's getting close to Vallarta, which is a huge deal to be able to have. You can still drive to those cities, but you're going through windy roads. And so the new highway system is approaching, I think within this year, they're expecting it to hit Vallarta. There is a new train system. There is an existing train system. As I understand it, it's kind of dated, not used widely or very accessible. But there are 4 or 5 new routes, including one route that will come from, I think, San Diego, Tijuana, that goes straight down the coast. So the western coast, and it will come to Vallarta. I think it's called the Jalisco line or some kind of line. So it will hit towns, cities along the western coast. And then from there, you'll be able to take routes that run east to Mexico City or Guadalajara. So those are a couple of years away, but they've started working on some of the other lines. It is. There's going to be lots of, and I think they're not high speed like East Coast of the U.S. or certainly other parts of the world, but higher speed, certainly. So I think lots of accessibility. Most people, I think, fly. So the flights to Guadalajara, Mexico City are pretty easy. Yep. Yeah. Easy and cheap.
Okay. Sounds like me. No, just kidding.
Cheaper and expensive.
What's the crime like? So when it's Mexico, people tend to say, "Uh-oh, cartel." And is there much crime in Vallarta? I mean, what type of crime what's the gun laws like?
Yeah, so it's my understanding that when owning a gun is difficult, certainly no
More difficult.
I mean, if you're walking around carrying a gun, you're going to get arrested if you're not military. So there you will see throughout town sometimes a military police presence with guns. It's not, sometimes it's shocking to some gringos who come into town and see that, but it's not, I would not say there's anywhere near the gun culture that we see in some parts of the U.S. I feel extremely safe as a black man. I feel far safer in Vallarta than I do in parts of LA, in parts of North Carolina, Virginia, where I've traveled, where I am on alert in the U.S. Wherever I travel. In Vallarta, I'm not. I mean, I'm aware,
Right,
but I don't
thinking about it.
Exactly.
It's
you
not
want
a
to
conscious thing that you're
Not at all.
constantly thinking about.
Not at all. So I feel safe. We rent out often to single people, older people, and we talk with them about getting around and being safe. They walking around during the day, I think overall people feel comfortable and safe. There are parts of town that get darker and later at night to 2 o'clock in the morning, probably not a good idea, as it wouldn't be in West Hollywood, which is 2 blocks away from me. So I think it's very safe. I've seen that with COVID, as I understand was the case in the US as well, there was an increase in kind of home burglaries and thefts, robberies on the street. But we're talking, it's a small town, so an increase of 100% might be going from 2 to 4 people, right, being mugged. So it's a, knock on wood, I think it's a pretty safe place. Downtown, there are people around, right? So it's
Comforting.
It
sounds comforting.
Yeah, it is. It's a place where, and that's one of the other reasons we chose Vallarta, right? We want to be able to let our guard down. As an older person, I don't want to walk around thinking I'm going to be mugged.
Looking over my shoulder, I don't want those days where I remember growing up as a kid, a teenager in Brooklyn, New York, looking over my shoulder, coming home from my friend's house at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, saying, "Oh my God, am I going to make it?"
Right.
So I don't want to go through that. So on to another topic, healthcare. So can you give us a brief rundown on what healthcare is like? How do we get, or how does one get, well, we didn't even go into residency and stuff like that. So quickly, if you can give us a brief rundown of healthcare system. Is it socialized medicine? Do you have to also purchase private insurance? And how does that work?
So I think yes to everything you just mentioned. I think there is kind of socialized healthcare available to nationals, and I think I'm not sure if getting temporary residency, but I believe getting permanent residency allows folks to have access to some healthcare. I don't know if it's on the scale of a national. I think many gringos come in with private, their own healthcare, or they will buy health insurance. Knock on wood, we've been fortunate not to need it. However, I mentioned my friends who visited a few years ago, the large group. At the end of that visit, one of them needed emergency surgery and had to be hospitalized. And I was with him and his wife. We took him to the hospital where he got immediate care. They live outside of Washington, D.C. What they described as high quality health care. They could not have been more pleased in terms of the care they received, the service they received. You do need insurance or you need a credit card to be seen in certain hospitals, so the private hospitals, which is where he went to. Okay? So had he gone to one of the local public hospitals, it's my understanding that he could have gotten the care, but it would likely have been a different quality of care.
Right.
We have a friend and a person who lives in our building who also needed emergency health care. They purchased private, they're full-time now in Vallarta, so they purchased they have health insurance, and also apparently could not have been, they're coming from Canada, which is important to mention, so that's their reference. And compared to the healthcare they receive in Canada, they were extremely impressed with the healthcare that they received. There are lots of hospitals within 2 blocks of us. I think there are 3 or 4 kind of hospital, kind of medical facilities, not full-scale hospitals, but where one can go to for medical care. Our nephew was down a couple of years. The first night of his visit, he broke his leg and needed health care. And they got out. So our nephew went over with my husband and his dad, and they came back, and my brother-in-law could not believe that they paid out of pocket. It was $150 for everything, including the meds, just everything, $150 US dollars. So healthcare available. I think a lot of people who move to Vallarta have some kind of healthcare coming into their move, or they purchase private care insurance.
Sounds, a lot more inexpensive than the healthcare that we're used to in the United States.
Very inexpensive, to the point that there are, even prior to COVID, there were home doctors. That is more common now. So if one gets sick, you can actually have a doctor come to your home for $40, $50, and that's them seeing you and giving you a prescription. If
I haven't even seen or heard of that since I was a kid. When the U.S., I remember maybe when I was 10 years old, doctors make house calls, and then they just stopped. So.
And COVID really made it part of, I think it's more previously it was unusual. There were a handful of doctors, I think, that were known to make house calls. Now it's pretty, I wouldn't say if it's more common than not, but it's easy to find a doctor who will pay a visit. Vallarta, I should also mention, is increasingly popular as a destination for cosmetic surgery and dentistry, with doctors who are, in Mexico, the medical cosmetic dentistry and just medicine in general, including dentistry, is considered very good, very strong. And so there are quite a few doctors who have offices in, say, Guadalajara. They're there most of the week, and then they have an office, hospital or clinic in Vallarta. So it is it's very popular for people now who want to come down for affordable dental work or procedures of any kind, but more so we're seeing that in terms of cosmetic procedures as well.
I know people from Phoenix who actually go down to Rocky Point, Mexico, which is like on the way to, I guess, California and the Baja area. So they go to Rocky Point. That's our closest beach to Phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
So Rocky Point, and then there's a section, as soon as you cross the border, there's a whole bunch of dentists and
That's right.
doctors where they're just lined up, and people have said they've done an incredible job. They do a great job, and they're a fraction of the cost.
And I hear that from our friends who live there, who are there full-time or part-time, but also from tourists who will say, I came down, we've had guests who have stayed with us who were coming down for procedures, and the cost of the procedure, the travel, the accommodations, as you said, still a fraction of the cost of what they would pay to have
Yeah.
much less done in the States. So,
Yeah. Okay.
and it's a lot more
How
fun,
about-
right?
Yeah.
It's-
Yeah, absolutely. How about, do you know anything about the residency and how to obtain a visa or temporary residency versus permanent?
Yeah, I know a little bit, and I can share a little bit about our experience. So we started maybe about 4 years ago, the residency process. At the time, we were planning to move. There's the temporary residency option and a full residency option, maybe more, but those are the two I'm familiar with. So at the time, we were going for full residency. We started the process. We were working. There are several companies and kind of officials and lawyers that offer these kinds of residency services. So we were working with one, and it requires that you start the process at an embassy in the States, and you work with them to submit the paperwork, and you have to be able to establish income, and that you will have an income if you're there full time. There are other requirements, or there were other requirements at the time in terms of being physically present and how long you remain in the country in general, but also throughout the residency process at different stages. COVID hit, and so for us, everything stopped. And then as we started coming out of COVID, we resumed the process, but somewhere along the way, as I understand it, partially in response to the situation with COVID, the laws changed. And so now the option that was available to us through full permanency is no longer available to us, because we're still going to be going back and forth between our home in Mexico and the one in Los Angeles. So we're not, if we were moving there full-time
Permanently.
then that option would still be available. So what we have to do now is get temporary residency, and I believe it's renewed up to 4 years automatically, and then after 4 years we'll move automatically or pretty close to automatically into full permanent residency, right?
Okay.
So we have just resumed the temporary residency process. It will require that we work with an embassy in the U.S. We're working with the same person we were working with previously. She's handling a lot of the scheduling and the paperwork, showing up. She will show up with us for our appointments in Vallarta. If I remember correctly, we need to plan for 2 weeks of being there once we arrive in order to get a stamp that we'll need in order to get temporary residency. That's been easier for me to do, not as easy for my husband. So we're just waiting to move to the next stage where we get that stamp in order to get temporary residency.
Okay. So we heard a lot of pros. Is there any cons you want to share with us of moving to Mexico or actually in Vallarta or living there?
So leaving, right, is always a con because it is hard to come back. But I would say the cons are not. It's difficult because there are things that come. They're associated with the things with the pros. So as I mentioned earlier, you are seeing more development. So I'm torn because I like what I knew about Vallarta when I first learned about it 7 years ago. Mm-hmm. You'll often hear people talk about the charm going away because of these new buildings. So there is, as I still consider myself a guest there, and so there is something that I find charming, but I hope it's not, I don't intend it to be charming in kind of this voyeuristic kind of Disneyland romanticized way, but there is something charming in terms of the culture, the slowness, which I think is something that appeals to me and certainly to my husband, and we would want to see it. I don't think it's necessarily unique to Vallarta, but there is a charm. There are things about Vallarta that are charming to us. And that is, there is some tension now with more and more tourists like me discovering Vallarta and looking at the affordability, relatively speaking, and buying homes there. So it's hard for me to not like that when I'm guilty of it. But at the same time, I'm weak and selfish at times, and I do like modern conveniences, and so that's kind of tough for me.
That's me too. I think we're brothers when it comes to that.
To find the balance, right?
Yeah. I want that peace and that calm and that laid back sort of thing, but at the same time, I want all the conveniences of being able to go to the store and getting anything that I want.
That's right.
So I'm growing up in some big cities. New York and Phoenix is like the 5th largest city in the United States. I can get anything, and I'm 10 minutes away from everything here. And when I lived in New York, I could walk just about to any place, and I love that.
Right.
That walkable thing, and I also love the charming, laid back way of life that other places afford. So that's me, but I think we're on the same wavelength there.
And I think because the scale, Mark, everything you're describing, that if one is new, if one is just arriving in Vallarta for the first time, if they have no reference, if they didn't know what it was like, they're going to, I guarantee it, many of them are going to describe it as charming, and they just can't, it seems very manageable. Exactly. It's for those of us, and 7 years I don't think is a long time, but I've certainly talked to people who have known Vallarta longer than that, 10, 15, 20 years, and for them they say, it's a crime to see what has happened.
It's no longer charming.
It's no longer
to them.
Charming, exactly, to them. It has developed, and so I don't know how much. I think for me, they've got a long ways to go before it is overly developed, as far as I'm concerned. At this point, I'm seeing change, and I like the change, and it's not displacing, it's not pushing away. There's still Vallarta and its authenticity, all of that is still there.
Right.
So, but I am struggling kind of with the development piece of it. As I mentioned, it's diverse, and it's in Mexico, right? So in terms of ethnicity and Mexico and that culture and the U.S. presence and the Canadian presence, but it's been mostly, I think, a Caucasian U.S. Canadian presence in the past. So I do miss, when we first arrived 7 years ago, I miss seeing Black people, and Asian people. So in terms of kind of that cultural mix,
Right.
it's not like Los Angeles or DC, Northern Virginia, DC.
Right.
So it's still an urban area, but I do miss
The diversity.
having a lot of different diversity and cultures around me. As I mentioned earlier, though, again, in the past couple of years, even that is changing. So that I feel more and more. I mean, when I walk through the airport in Vallarta, hear all of these different languages, see all of these different cultures. That is addressing something that is. I wouldn't say it is a con for me, the lack of that, but it is something that I'm also still not full time there, so I don't know, had it not changed, how difficult would it be for me to be there for the rest of my life if I didn't see other Black people around. I get to leave at this point, and even if I wasn't in the last couple of years, I am, as I said, seeing more and more of that. So not quite a con, but something that I'm glad to see changing a bit.
That's good. Anything else that you'd like to add before we wrap it up?
I would encourage people, this idea of Vallarta being an inclusive, welcoming place. It is that, in what I'm seeing is that it's becoming that for more than white gay men, which is what I think Vallarta was known for. So for people for straight families, for people of color, non-Mexican, Hispanic, Latino culture, married couples, of gay couples, lesbians. Right? So I would encourage all of those people from those communities who might have thought Vallarta is for gay men, white gay men, and perhaps single, younger white gay men. It is so much more than that, and is becoming more. I mean, you see Facebook groups created for Black people who have moved to Vallarta, for gay couples with kids, right? So that is what Vallarta is becoming more and more of, which feels really wonderful.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I want to thank you, Devon, for your time and for being a guest on our show. It was really great, informative. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure this is not going to be the last time I hear from you because you can't get away from me now.
Yes. And that's a good thing.
And thank you for being a moderator also on our Facebook group as well.
Absolutely.
A big help as well. Thank you for that. And we'll talk to you soon.
My pleasure, Mark, and thank you for the opportunity. And I look forward to showing you Vallarta around, hopefully in person.
I can't wait. I can't wait. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Where Do Gays Retire podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to our podcast and consider making a donation by clicking the coffee cup on any page at www.wheredogaysretire.com. Each cup of coffee that you buy costs $5 and goes towards helping us continue the podcast. Thank you for your continued support.